basically drops off, then there's nothing they can do about it. And at this point, those 7 are close to that point. Checks went out for October for 17 of these 33 households. In most cases, the households chose to wait until November for the first checks. In some cases, they just did not complete the documentation in time. So the remaining ones will start in November. So all 33 will get November, or their landlords will get November checks. And some of the ones that are in process now will probably also get their first checks in November. Jennifer calculates that with the present number of accepted households, that the program would disperse around $93,000 at the end of the 3 months for each of the households. Therefore, there is the ability to help another estimated 15 to 20 households, which would bring us up to the number that we were anticipating to begin with, something closer to 45 to 50. That includes the 10 that are in process now, so it's not that large a gap, but there is room for additional households. So her thought about it is that we just continue to add people to the wait list and work through those applications and add people to the program on a rolling basis. That does mean that there needs to be more outreach. It is known, well, there are several ways in which we, from September 29th, I think, or 30th, we made people know that they could submit late applications. It's on our website. It is something we've notified a number of organizations about. But since we've got this additional capacity, it makes sense to do more outreach and to look at perhaps areas that we didn't hit, constituencies we didn't hit as well as we might have initially. So that's the plan that Jennifer and I were planning on it, assuming that you would not suggest anything different. As far as the characterization of the households that have been accepted, is very similar to the last report that I provided to the partnership. Over 55% of the households are of color. And many of them are families, in excess of the percentage of families in Watertown. Something like 28% of the households in the town have children, and there are more than that percentage who are in the program that have children. So in that sense, we're tracking, I think, the demographics that we were expecting. So that's where we are as of this afternoon.
Does anyone have questions, comments? My thought on this is it's going fine, and we should accept Jennifer's recommendation and just let it go forward as is.
That makes sense to me. I mean, it sounds like, it's all been working, and it's good. I mean, we have more funds available from our initial allocation. We should continue to market, and hopefully it can help some more families.
Any other comments?
I had one question for Michael. If earlier he'd been concerned that it wasn't available to his residents, and I know that they've gotten some assistance through the CRF funds. What do you think your status is at this point, Michael? Have most people been helped, or do you still see a big need there?
There's still a need. It was COVID-related loss of income. We saw some significant payouts on the CRF. I think one was as large as 10,000. They were really struggling a lot of different reasons, and so that was fantastic. But certainly still a need, and I believe we're scanning and sending in applications that were completed just so that we were ready to go, to add them to a wait list, I believe, as a potential, whether it's for the second round of funding or, we're able to address all the households that we need to now, and we say, we'd love to see a couple more applications and we'd be ready. So I think it makes sense to, for the future, open it up to affordable housing subsidies, including Section 8, not just public housing residents, because they are the vulnerable population. So.
Michael, I have a question. I know we've talked about this every time it's come up, but can you explain a little bit more where these residents are in the process of getting income recertifications through HUD and Section 8 and sort of the normal public subsidy channels to fill those gaps?
You're saying what other sources are we looking at to fill those gaps? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that if a tenant in public housing or a Section 8 voucher holder, their income went down, then there's a process for getting a income recertification with HUD, so that the tenant would only be still required to pay 30% of their income, and their regular subsidy would pay the rest. But there's a process to go through. There's paperwork. There's delays. So I understand it's not immediate, and I think that was part of the reason for, you needing funds through the resilience fund and, upfront. But just now that, we're a ways in, I mean, is that process working in terms of getting income recertifications, or is there something wrong with that process?
It's the process that I've been pushing to streamline. We've hired a new full-time employee to essentially do almost recertifications full-time, and the adjustments are constant in public housing. But I would say, as opposed to our Section 8 program, we're struggling because there's a massive language barrier. We're doing a language access plan to assess our own population, but the residents that have some sort of language barrier are struggling to get the paperwork necessary to make the adjustments on time, as opposed to Section 8, where they have to be citizens often. In state public housing, there is no requirement to show citizenship. And so that's what we believe to be the reason that adjustments aren't happening in a timely manner on the residents' end, because we can't expedite it just based on their word, right? We need some sort of documentation to do it. And we try to excuse those adjustments when we can, but state is allowing for a little less leniency than they used to when it came to going retroactively on those adjustments for our public housing residents. So they end up building a debt very quickly. And so we find them COVID related because since March, we've seen an increase in a few debts. Also, just don't even want to begin, but we had a resident who was being taken advantage of who's lacking cognitively. That's not our place to say what their mental health situation is, but somebody in the residence was taking money from him and his Social Security. And, it's terrible to think that, but, the rent still didn't change. We had to gather documentation to show that he was going to a clinical social worker to talk about all the stress that he was having because his sister was taking his funds and he was somewhere on the autism spectrum. So I don't even know where to begin, I guess, on, where the debts are happening, because it's kind of all over the place. But the most common one is people not getting their adjustments in a timely manner and building up a debt because they were collecting money at the time, but, it wasn't enough that they could make it by. And by the time their minimum rent, when they're $5 rent, they've already created a $1,000 or $2,000 arrear that we may not necessarily be able to forgive. So.
That's really helpful to hear kind of the context of what's working, what's not working, and where the gaps are.
Sure, and I think I said last month, at this point, we are in much better shape than we used to be. It's unfortunate that there's still a need, but it's there.
Maybe going back to Steve's initial question, I mean, I know when we left off at the last meeting, we talked about maybe if it was a second round of funding, but is there any thought to now that we have a pretty good sense of where we are, whether opening it up to WHA tenants prior to this a second round of funding? Should we? Is there any Does that make sense or not?
If you have a successful program going right now, you know, and you have a lot of responses from, I guess you would say, non-public housing, non-Section 8 residents, people that aren't in some sort of deep subsidy, I would say continue it based on the funding that we've allocated for it. That's my opinion. And, you know, we would look to do it if there's a second round of funding. But if you're, you know, lacking applicants and there's more people who are looking to get out money from this emergency rental assistance program, then let us know. Absolutely. And we have applications ready. You know, they're scanned in, they're labeled, and we would be ready. But I don't see a point where it's such an emergency because we're the ones moving forward with evictions. I'm not evicting anybody for non-payment during COVID-related issues. And so there is a sense of urgency. They need to pay down these arrears, but I don't think there would be an issue waiting until the second round myself.
What's just to get a sense, what are the sort of range, what's the arrears looking like for these, you know, are they in the 500 to 1,000? Are they less or more?
It can vary. With your elderly, it can be very small. You can see $200, $250, $500, and your families, you're going to often see $1,500 to $2,000 is probably an average, with a lot being on the 900, 500, 1,000 side, and a few, you know, people who've really been struggling, drug-related issues in the household. They're spending the money the wrong way during COVID times. Now they owe us $4,400, and you know, there's no paperwork that could forgive the rent. They just fell apart and didn't have any support system in place. So, like I said, it varies on the family side, but we see large arrears there. Yes, sometimes over 1,000, average of $1,500 per household, probably.
Just a question, Michael, if you had to make a ballpark guess about the overall number of households that are in arrears and the overall size of the arrearage, what do you think it would be?
I know it. It was a big mission of ours. It used to be $210,000. It's down to about $97,000 after the last 2 years for me being a very difficult and micromanaged director when it comes to accounts receivable. But we've made a lot of strides there. Still at 97,000. I mean, once we're under 50 or 40, that's about regular for a housing authority of our size. Which are COVID-19 related, that's difficult to say. I would say probably around 35 to 40,000 of that was related to COVID, but we're ballparking. You know, that's me and my manager guessing. We have not done any data or analytics to look at that because how could we? You know, we don't have that capacity. So.
How many households are involved?
That's a great question. We have 25 households that make up about 80% of the debt. And then, you know, it's over 100 households that have minimal arrears, a lockout they didn't pay for, little things like that. But the big arrears, you're down to about 20-some families that very few have been difficult. The most are just tough situations, and they will tell us very lengthy stories as to why they've gotten there. But it's tough because the things that happen to them in their life, whether it's mental health or whether it's a son died, all of a sudden a wife died in one case, they were just deer in the headlights and they didn't know what to do and they didn't want to talk to us. And, you know, often those spiral out of control, and we're trying to create a system where we catch them quicker, but it's tough. So.
Okay, thank you.
You said 25 families account for about 80% of which figure, the 40 or 50,000 COVID or the overall 90?
The overall, it comes down to about 20 households, 2 or 3 of which we're just about to move forward with an agreement for judgment that had lapsed in court, and we were going to go forward with eviction, and that was March 14th of this year. So as you can imagine, that timing did not work out for the 2 or 3 families that really weren't helpful. They weren't even trying to help. So
I would suggest, I think Michael's suggestion makes sense. And, you know, when we have our next partnership meeting, we can, you know, again, evaluate where we are with the program and, you know, how many families we're serving, what kind of resources we have. And if we want to open up a second round, then we could consider, you know, expanding it and making it available at that point. But I don't think there's an immediate need to change the program at this point. At least that'd be my opinion.
I would agree with that for sure.
Are there other comments?
Not at this time.
I think I haven't asked Steve about this. This is something I just came to. I think it makes sense for us in the near future, or the partnership, through staff in the near future, to make a brief written report to the council about the program. Steve, does that make sense to you? He's saying yeah.
You did.
Sorry, I couldn't. Yes, I think that makes sense.
As far as the way we actually worded our paperwork, we didn't put anything in there that I saw that's a restriction of having folks that are in public housing apply. They would be on the waiting list like everyone else applying after the fact. The question I have with this is, we go forward with these people who are 20 households or so, are we paying the arrears rent? Because the program is really structured to pay future rents. Now, I know the landlord puts it wherever he wants to, he or she, but are we okay with just letting them come on to the waiting list?
That's actually not where I think we're at this point. What Michael was suggesting was that he's collected the information, and at the appropriate time, whether it's the next meeting or at a future time, if the partnership opens up to public housing tenants, he's in a position to submit the applications. For right now, what he was suggesting is that he would defer to continuing the program, so the people who are in the private market, who are more at risk with eviction, especially now that the moratorium is lifted, would, we have an opportunity to help them first.
Okay. So basically that's then the summary of what we decided. And unless there's some objection to it, I'd like to move on to the housing production plan. And there were several questions that came up from Larry and Steve. One of them is related to goal number 1. And there we have worded this that we're going to include the 10% goal. And at the time we did this, the thought was that this would put us in line a little bit for submission of the plan, and that might give us a bit of a leg up in applying for grants or some sort of administrative help for future projects. The other question that they have posed for us is, do we or do we not need to have an annual number that we wish to create? And that might be what we want to create ourselves as separate from the inclusionary zoning units, or just a total number. At the time, we didn't put that in with the thought that it's setting us up for failure on an annual basis, because one year we might do great and the next year we might not create any units. So those are 2 points right there. There's another point on goal 2 that Larry has. And as it is now, it's worded 60% AMI as we're generating units going forward. And if it were worded at 65%, this could cause some difficulties in applying for money from DHCD. So those are 2 points that have come up, and I'll open this up for discussion. Questions?
Well, I'll throw some comments out there. In regards to the 65 versus 60%, I think that's a smart move. We will, I don't see any reason not to do it. It's not that big a difference, and I think we could, end up potentially missing out on pots of money in the future if we're not strategic about this now. And I think it's best to settle the question of what ranges we want to focus on up front, how the funding sources work. In regards to the first question, let me just scroll back up to where that is so I can make sure I speak thoughtfully.
That's the 10%.
Yes. I would leave that in there. I think there should be some sort of aspirational goal. I'm still not convinced that we should have an annual target. But I think setting 10% as a goal does give us something to work towards and give us something to benchmark our progress against. It's hard to predict which units can be created where, if you want to include inclusionary units, you're very dependent on the real estate market and the housing market. Private housing market may be cooling down right now. It's hard to know. If you're just going to look at other sources of funds, I think, until the CPA is up and running and they see fit to appropriate funds for affordable housing development, our hands are going to largely be tied there as well, unless Metro West can pull something out of the hat. They're always trying to do, but it's a struggle to put those kinds of deals together. So I'll stop there for now.
Other comments?
I'll go next. I think on the first one, I agree with everything that Cliff said. I think it's good to have an aspirational goal, for benchmarking purposes, but it sounds like without the requirement to do an annual goal, that doesn't seem as big of a priority, given that we're not under, we don't need it for 40B purposes. So on the 60 versus 65, I'm a little bit confused so it used to say 65, right? And then the proposal was to change it to 60. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you referring to the plan or the actual inclusionary zone?
No, in
No,
the
not the
plan, right?
inclusionary zoning.
plan.
Right. Okay.
So,
Create.
okay, so as it currently is as edited, the goal says 60, but then strategy 2A still refers to 65 with respect to the inclusionary zoning. So those should be consistent because we can't have a strategy that has a higher AMI than the goal.
And I don't think they're linked. The inclusionary zoning is going to generate the units at 80% AMI, 65% AMI as is specified in the zoning ordinance. What we create from other money and other grants could be at 60%. I don't see an inconsistency in that unless there's something I'm missing.
Well, I mean, I agree that units created with non-inclusionary sources would likely be under 60 because of the tax credit limits. But it just in terms of the plan, if we have a goal that specifically references 60, and then strategy 1 references 65, doesn't that not make sense to have a strategy to achieve a goal where the strategy has a higher income limit than the goal?
Well, what we're saying is we want to generate new units that are less than 65, or in the case of the proposal, 60% AMI. So it's less than that number.
Right. So if you expanded the 65% affordable inclusionary zoning tier, you could succeed at strategy 2A and fail at goal 2, right? As written.
So there are 3 different goals that really are very interrelated. There is a goal 4 that talks about having housing at different price points. So that could be above 80% of AMI or could be below 80% of AMI. Then we've got goal 1, which is below 80% of AMI. And then we've got goal 2, which, whether it's 60 or 65%, is a subset of goal 1 and a subset of goal 4. And the way in which those things get reconciled, rather than someone saying you're not paying attention to the math, is that they're really focused on different kinds of strategies. So when you talk about goal 1, although it's talking broadly about 80%, and it includes units that could be created that are below 60 or 65%, the strategy has to be sufficient to capture the 60 or 65 to 80% of AMI, which is going to be, just because of the nature of the housing market, it's going to be inclusionary. And so goal 1 is much more focused on that population. It is people who are for the most part, they're 75 to 80% of AMI, and they're going into the new developments that on Pleasant Street or on Arsenal. Then when you're focused on goal 2, if it's below 60% of AMI, it's a signal that you're looking for things that are eligible for the tax credit DHCD round. So it's going to be projects that are 100% affordable, that will be able to get federal and state tax credits. And you may, the proponent of the application to DHCD may have different tiers. They might be, under 30% or under 50%, but they, in order to qualify, are going to be under 60%. So that's a very different strategy, different kind of project that is called for under goal 1. And by choosing the number 65, which I understand why that happened, it happened because 65% is what is in the lower tier under inclusionary. It's not, I think, clear that the primary thrust of goal 2 is to get 100% affordable developments that are eligible for the DHCD round.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I understand the intent of goal 2. It just kind of jumped out at me that the goal said 60, and then the strategy talked about something, strategy right below it talked about something that wouldn't achieve that goal. I don't know if no one else thinks that's weird, then I'm not.
No, it did seem a little confusing in that regard, but
Right. If I could,
someone who's not familiar with it may have difficulty reconciling the two,
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand the different programs, but just so you put those numbers together, especially if you're not familiar with it. Although for the record, you can actually get tax credits at higher than up to 80% AMI these days, but that's fun. Yeah, those are complicated deals.
yeah. So just to explain.
Might I suggest that we think about perhaps moving that strategy to goal 1, where we're already addressing inclusionary? And at that point, goal 2 really is more clearly focused on creating developments that would qualify for a range of subsidies, as opposed to inclusionary, which is a very particular kind of affordable housing development financing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one solution, kind of, to, rather than be focused on the numbers, focus on the types.
Yeah.
Stuff. I think just the issue is that the lower tier of inclusionary zoning is by definition kind of in the middle. So then when we're trying to organize stuff, it's hard to find.
I can see your point.
Perhaps the way to go forward with this, the 60% has a financial impact for us when we're generating housing. So that does make some degree of sense, at least to me. if we're concerned about the inconsistency with the inclusionary zoning, we could propose to modify the inclusionary zoning. We already have that in there as a potential thing to do, and drop the 65 to 60. We have in the past generated housing at number 2 Rosary Drive that I do not believe that that's not 65% housing or 80% housing. I believe it's lower.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's got a variety of subsidies in it too. It's probably a fairly complicated financing package behind that one. I think it would make some sense to try to consolidate the inclusionary provisions in one location. And I think then you do have a goal too that really is much more purely aimed at providing the basis for developing affordable housing through a nonprofit or the housing authority or another organization that can provide more deeply affordable units, which is really not what inclusionary is designed to do. When you get right down to it, it's just, the numbers just don't work that well since they have to self-subsidize it in the project.
Sure.
I think that might make some sense here.
Other comments?
Maybe just spelling it out a little more clearly in goal 2, that references the 60% in terms of the tax credits or eligibility or something,
Larry, do you want to reword so that it's consistent with what we're saying?
Yes.
And maybe we could bring this to the next meeting or let everybody look at it ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Are there
I
any
have one
other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I do have one, and I think I'm probably somewhat responsible for this, since I think I'm the one who might be the one who first brought transit-oriented development into some of this discussion. I noticed that we have transit-oriented development referenced in strategy 1E, and it's also addressed again under goal 4, which is really about providing what I would call workforce housing. I'm not sure that it really fits well under goal 1 because it doesn't provide a subsidy per se that's going to help make a unit affordable at 80% or less. Where I think it does make more sense when you're talking about workforce housing more broadly read, which is housing roughly, say, for people, the 80 to 120%, where transit-oriented development could provide a lower development cost in a way that might actually impact the cost of those units. So I would just suggest moving that out of strategy 1 and consolidating it into strategy 4.
Comments?
I want to go back to the first point about having a housing production goal, or the 10% goal. And I wanted to just raise the question in the context of some comments that Councilor Picciarelli made, both to Larry and to myself. And last night, as the Human Services Partnership was talking about, affordable housing. And, one of the points he made, and I wanted to make sure that you all considered this in the context of that goal. One of the points that he made is, from the perspective of many people in Watertown, we've produced a lot of housing, and the need to continue producing housing wasn't so much a desire, but the need is to produce affordable housing. And being untethered from the prescriptions of Chapter 40B, he was kind of posing the question of, do we want to, make our planning efforts as it relates to housing, strictly focused on, producing affordable housing, much more so than a broader housing production plan. So I wanted to raise that, to get your reactions, both in terms of, putting his idea on the table and also giving an opportunity to think about that.
Okay. So if we take that comment or suggestion, then that would say that the goal should be to increase the affordable housing above 10%. That's what that would do.
Well, I think what his point would be is not even necessarily put a number to it. And going back to both Helen and Cliff, maybe it's a good idea to have an aspirational goal, to have something to measure against. I think his point was one of, let's try to produce affordable housing and not necessarily set a goal that, either we are or aren't, meeting on an annual basis, but instead really focus on just trying to produce affordable housing.
Well,
I
the
don't see,
10% refers to affordable housing. It does not. It doesn't say anything about allowing developers to build more condos. So I'm not seeing the problem with the number of 10%. I don't think it's a big deal either way. It does, or was suggested before, that it might give us some sort of a leg up in applying for grants and some other administrative help that we might want to have that in there, because it's what the state has put in the statute. Any other comments on this? To remove it, leave it in, change it?
Can I just make two?
yeah, and I think it's important to have an aspirational goal there. And I make sure I'm sorry, Steve, some of your comments broke up a little bit. I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying when you were repeating what Councilor Piccarelli had spoken to you about. Was he indicating that he thought the plan should focus purely on affordable housing and not address other types of housing at all?
Yeah, I think to some extent that is what he would suggest, that
Yeah.
the broader need in town, in his estimation, and I would suspect that that's driven in large part by his interactions with residents around town, is that there isn't a perceived need necessarily to increase the amount of housing in town in a general sense. There is a perceived need to create more affordable housing. And again, that's one opinion.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the comments that were given to CPC committee, which Larry forwarded to us prior to this meeting, I would have to respectfully disagree with the counselor there. There were a number of comments there that spoke to the lack of affordability housing for people who work, quote, regular jobs, unquote. So I think, this plan, personally, I think this plan should address housing affordability, just affordable housing, because the affordable housing is a complicated and multi-part issue. The availability of housing for people in the moderate and low income ranges, under 80% in the Boston area, is a very difficult situation that you're not going to be able to meet purely through the market. Where the question of addressing the housing need for people in the middle and upper middle income ranges, who are also starting to have trouble in some communities, are potentially addressable through market mechanisms and through zoning. So I think it is appropriate to include that here. Granted, the focus of this committee has been on affordable housing up till now. But if the sense of the citizens of the town is that we need to be addressing other forms of housing affordability, then we probably should be thinking about that as well. And there does seem to be some evidence that that is the case.
Well, I think, I'm sorry. I mean, I think there can be, a panoply of needs, but then you kind of prioritize, and, obviously, the kind of those who are 80% or less are more impacted and greater need and have greater cost burden percentage-wise and so forth. And so, we can tailor the plan a little bit, if that's the will of the partnership, or, towards that, prioritizing of the need, not saying that there aren't needed at all these different tiers, but when you have limited public resources, you just, you focus on those with the greatest need,
Other comments or a motion to change something?
I just wanted to clarify 2 points. One is an aspect of the point that was being made by the counselor was that by picking 10% as the goal, which people associate with Chapter 40B, that it's suggesting that that is our aspiration, as opposed to what is the affordable housing need in Watertown. An ascertainment by the partnership that a certain number or percentage is what we need in Watertown, I think he would find more compelling than taking the statutory goal. And the second point of clarification is that I think at this point, whether Watertown is at 10% or not is not going to be a factor in DHCD grant decisions. We're designated as a housing choice community. The numbers are very clear about the production of both market rate housing and affordable housing over the last 10 years. So I don't think that it's going to be something will be held against us that we're not at 10%. We're moving closer to that. And housing choice is a specific program where you do get eligibility for or preference for a grant every 2 years. And so we're already qualifying for that.
And just speaking to Vinny's point, if I understand it a little bit, I mean, that's not to say that we can't obviously, prioritize and projects that might be, 100% affordable or some greater, than inclusionary zoning to move us further along in meeting the need. Yeah, I understand the 10%, whether it's aspirational, whether I don't know, but I guess I've come down on a little bit, at least now, just people need some kind of a target. Otherwise it's hard for people to get their arms around, I think. You have to show them progress towards something,
Just one other comment here. I just hopped over to the HUD Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data, or CHAS data, which is what is used to measure the percentage of households that have a housing problem, usually cost burden. And 25% of the households in Watertown are estimated to have a housing problem. And I will guarantee you that the vast majority of those are going to be due to cost burden. To pick 10% is actually a pretty moderate position compared to what you could pick, because I'm not sure how else you would measure it at this point. There are other ways to back into it using American Community Survey data, but really that's what you're doing. You should look at the CHAS data, because that is using ACS data and it's using it in a way that can't. So we can dig into that a little bit more and find out just how many have a cost problem and what income rungs they fall into. But I will much guarantee you that 10% is the floor of what we would end up picking if we went that route. So it is a fairly moderate position.
Other comments or motion in any of this?
I don't know if we need a motion if we're not proposing to change anything in a significant way.
That is what I'm hearing, that we're not changing anything.
Yeah. I mean, just ask Larry to address the comments that we've made as a board in the draft.
If I just want to ask to clarify what you were saying. Were you suggesting that for the housing plan that that based on particularly some of the CPC feedback, that some of these goals should address folks who are at above 80% AMI? Is that what you were?
Well, there certainly does seem to, based on the CPAC comments that I saw, which is granted a relatively small number of people, there does seem to be concern about housing affordability for more middle income people. And we do address that in goal 4. So I think it's appropriate to keep it in there. And that's why I say I'd rather see the plan speak about housing affordability rather than capital and affordable housing per se.
Housing affordability rather than, say that again?
Housing affordability rather than just affordable housing more narrowly defined.
Uh-huh.
Even though I will grant you that I think the bulk of the work we're going to do is going to be around affordable housing, given the nature of what we are able to do here. But I think it's important to acknowledge, at least acknowledge that this is a extensive and complex problem, and that helping people in one income range will certainly leave other people with their needs unaddressed in the short term anyway. And I don't want to make light of that, because I see multiple sides of this, and it's very difficult to try to meet all the needs, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much resources you have. There's the housing problems in the region are so reaching right now that you just decide where you want to go. You can start there.
The cost of housing outside of the narrow definition that we have of affordable housing, just regular housing that somebody has built, is really controlled by the construction costs. And I don't see how we have any impact on that unless we offer grants to people, or it's not clear what we would do to drive down the cost of regular housing. I mean, it might be possible to change some of the codes that are specific for Watertown, if that indeed has any effect on the cost of the housing. I seriously doubt it does.
There are things we can look at, but I'm not proposing we get into the detail of that now. If that was the route we wanted to go, but a lot of it would probably have to be addressed through the zoning code, most likely. Given the experiences that I've had, that seems like the way you would start. And that's not typically something that we talk about outside of the inclusionary provisions at this stage of the game.
I mean, this plan is addressing the affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other comments, or can we move on from this at this point? Because I think Michael has something that he'd like to talk about. Okay, let's move on.
Before we leave the subject of the plan, we should talk about next steps.
Okay.
Are we done talking about the plan, actually, or are we moving?
No, he wants to talk about implementation. Let's do that.
I'm sorry?
You want to talk about
You're talking about
implementation of the plan?
The next agenda item, you mean? You're talking about?
No, under the housing plan, the implementation of it, is that, Larry, is that what you're saying?
Let me make 2 points. One is that if anyone has any comments about the timelines that are in the implementation plan section, they should provide that. There have been recommendations basically about what's near term, what is midterm, what is long term. But the bigger point is that before we leave tonight, I think it's worthwhile talking about the next steps of the partnership in considering the plan. I know that I would be able to turn around another draft in a relatively short period of time, but the question is whether it is appropriate now to make a special effort to get public comment on the plan in draft form so that that can be further taken into consideration before you get to a point where you are considering a vote on the plan.
It seems like a wise move.
Oh, yeah.
I did not hear that. Could you speak up?
I said that sounds like a wise move to me to ask for public comment at this stage before it goes to the council.
Right.
Undoubtedly, there'll be more discussion there too.
Okay.
If we can,
Then the question is, do we do this at our next meeting in November? Or the alternative would be to schedule a Zoom meeting open to the public for whatever number of the Housing Partnership members and Larry would like to join in on that, and let people submit written and oral comments. Thoughts on that?
can I ask Larry and Steve what kind of response we might get? If they have any sense of that? Would it be one comment? Would it be 100 comments? And probably somewhere in the middle, but if it's in the low numbers, we could probably include it in. And if it's getting more than that, then we probably should set aside some additional time.
Sort of depends, I think, on the outreach, how you do,
Yeah,
how you put it
true.
out there.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of like the CPC put it up on, and made it available for people to comment on different sections as they were putting together their kind of plan, goals and plan.
Goals and plan would go on the
I'm
website.
saying, but I mean, I just meant, posting it up on a website for available for the general public to, comment on. I don't know how you were contemplating making it available for comment.
Well, written comments, that would be fine, but what about people that want to speak to it? And the thought would be that we do it on a Zoom meeting and get it on the TV. And
Well, you can do both, and you can take comments prior to the thing, then have a meeting, having received the comments.
so then the real question is, do we schedule that meeting before the November meeting and get some comments, keeping in mind we also have a lot of comments already from the CPA. So we could do that, say November 10th or something, or sometime before our meeting, schedule a Zoom meeting for public comment and collect any written comments as well. Or do we do the same thing at our November meeting, which we could be using the November meeting to do the final approval of this thing and then move it on to the council?
I like the
Will we
idea of
make
having an additional
changes?
meeting.
Sorry, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to ask, will we be making changes based on those comments, do you think? Because if we're making changes, maybe that, if that's a separate meeting, then we could prepare the changes based on those comments for the November meeting. But, if we don't anticipate making significant edits, which I know is tough to anticipate, but then we could just do it all in one meeting. But having the second meeting, if we need the time to make the edits, may make sense.
Yeah.
Well, we really haven't gone through the other goals unless we're moving on from that, and you were just pause. Are you pausing to sort of just figure out how strategy for moving forward, or are we going to go through?
We're talking
any of the other-
implementation, how we collect public input.
Right. Well, I think
Seems
we
like a lot
could
of
use
meetings.
one more revision before it sort of goes out in whatever form that it goes out, for comment and or feedback,
Any other thoughts?
So David, you're suggesting that we have the November meeting, then put it out public review?
Just a thought, I don't know, it depends, again, as Michael was saying, how much more revision, but we've only sort of gone through the first, whatever, 2 or 3 goals, and we have a few more goals. If we think there's gonna be, it's sort of maybe at the end of where we are, then we can sort of make a determination of what needs to be done. It seems a little hard to determine unless you're prepared to just send it out and, in kind of in this preliminary. I
Well,
think it could use another, I think we're making good progress, but I'm not sure that, I think, not that we have to take a vote on it to send it to the council, but I think it just needs at least one more pass through before
Well-
getting it out to public, but that's just my particular sense, but I'm not married to that as the only way to make it happen, but I do feel like maybe one more revision might be helpful after this after this meeting.
Well, we have gone through approximately a year of discussions and putting this document together. And Larry has what looked to me like an almost final document. It does need
Well, then,
to have a couple of blanks filled in. And I know you, David, made a suggestion about the data, having some of the data more local rather than state, that Larry's on top of doing. What it seems to me is that
it's fine. I'm not saying, I don't think we should drag, sorry, go ahead, Fred. I mean, I think in earnest, Larry has really moved it down, the plan down the field. I mean, we have been spinning our wheels for a bit of time before, and then with the COVID interrupting and Andrea, but now it's finally taking, I think, some real shape in the last couple of months since Larry's come on board, but.
I agree. It's in good shape. What it needs is to be put in something that looks like a final format so that the tables are all on the same page and things like that. It's more formatting changes that are it needs at this point, I think.
Well, I'm
comments?
less worried about that. It's more about the 6 core, the goals that we're putting out there as, trying to make sure this is where we've landed, but.
David, do you have concerns about the goals? And feel that we should be
Well, I don't know.
discussing
I
them
mean, I
more?
understand. I just think it can use, yeah, well, my one thing I was going to, I don't know when we get to it, but goals 4 through 6, and maybe this is arbitrary, I kind of felt like there could be some collapsing or consolidating of those goals. I don't know what the right number of goals is, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6, but I don't know. It's started to feel like it was the ability to consolidate perhaps 4, 5, and 6, or collapse them down to, but that's just maybe that's, not that important, but so it's a factor of time. But I'm just always a little leery about getting something out to the public, particularly the wider public, without feeling like we're right there. If people feel like we're right there anyway, then so be it. But I'm not sure that I feel like it's kind of right there yet. I think it's getting there, but it doesn't have to be, not every I has to be dotted. Yeah.
May I say something, Fred? Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it.
I think it's really important that you all watch the meeting that occurred last night with the Human Services Committee, because I believe that you are talking at cross purposes in many cases. And I also think you're at cross purposes with some of the concerns that the CPC committee has. And I feel that every wheel is spinning in a different direction at this point. And I agree with David. I think it'd be premature to put something out that to me looks still very, very rough. And I think you really need to hear what Vinny had to say last night. The concern in this community is that Watertown really address affordability for the people that live and work here. And you do not have community preference listed as an issue, which the CPC believes should occur. Nobody answers this question. There are 4 condos coming on the market. Nobody answers this question. We've built a ton of housing but a lot of it is all geared to the luxury market. And then we have the inclusionary zoning. I've talked with developers. We can buy down units in those developments. There's things that we can do, but I don't hear any discussion about that. We could maybe build a building that would be all affordable housing, because one of our members worked on a building like that in Cambridge. But we don't have $150 million plus in a trust fund. We are Watertown. We raise about $2 million a year plus. We'll get about this year, maybe 17.6, 18%, depending. That's what Stewart estimated from the coalition. Let's say it's 20. Okay, that's another 400,000. I see things in here that it seems that you think you're going to get 100% of CPA funds, leverage up to 100%. The key issue that people in this community had was more open space, more green space. So I think that you are all talking at different levels of what came out of CPC. I'm not sure what kind of report Larry gave you, but man, I've been at this a long time, and I'm really concerned of what I see going on right now. This is about Watertown, and Vinny had very clear statements about what he thought was important. You don't even need a public hearing. We just all need to have some sense of being on the same page in some similar direction, which I just do not see. And I'm not trying to be, how can I say it? I'm just trying to be as honest as possible, because I attend all these meetings. I've attended almost every Human Services Committee meeting, and there's still no plan. And it's very hard for someone like me that says, okay, what is the plan? What are you trying to achieve? It's just, Steve and Larry, why don't you do this project? Steve and Larry, why don't you look into that? And eventually it all has to go to the council anyway. Whatever we recommend goes to the council. There seems to be a huge grab trying to go on about getting a housing trust. What else are you going to fund that housing trust with? You think it's just going to be CPA money? What are you going to accomplish? Newton doesn't have a housing trust. You have a housing project, you bring it to the CPA, they vet it, and it goes on to the city council. It seems like there's a grab going here. We as a CPC are part of spending the people's purse. And I think you really need to understand that about this committee. Because I heard somebody say last night, we just need the money. We need the money. That's a really bad take on what's going on. And I'm sorry if I sound a little fierce about this, but it's really disturbing to me. Thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, if I can comment on this, you've brought this up before about local preference. I believe we included local preference in this plan.
Yes, we do. We do include it. It is included in there. It is included in there.
I can't find it. I have such a marked up copy that.
No, it is in there. You can do it, then do a search in the document, but it is in there.
Are you
It's under
talking
goal
about the
6, I
goals?
believe. It's under goal 6, one of the strategies. And that it is, and I'll also add, I believe that is in there in response to comments like yours and those of Councilor Piccarelli.
I'm
Who
sorry,
raised it as an issue with us previously.
Cliff, I'm sorry. I'm looking at goal 6 on the housing production plan that I have, the 3-pager, which is dated 2/18/2020. And I must be blind because I do not see it listed under goal 6. So I apologize. I don't see it.
Strategy 6B, evaluate using local preference in affordable housing lotteries.
Okay, then I don't have the most up-to-date thing, because my 6B is crossed out, and that was strategy, strengthen community partnerships focused on addressing housing problems.
Okay, let's solve this problem right up front. Larry, can you get her the plan that everyone else is looking at? Because
Yeah, I emailed it to her last week. So Elodia, it's the 44-page draft housing plan. And it has
I have that, Larry. I have that, but I'm getting confused of what you're talking about, because in one point you're looking at draft proposals and goals, which I thought was a 3-page document that you're talking about. And now you're talking, I believe, the housing plan of Watertown, correct?
Yeah, but look at page 39.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what somebody said.
Look at page 39.
Thank you. Oh, it seems, I didn't know, maybe I thought you were on this other document. You've been talking about this one all along. Sorry, it's a lot of meetings, a lot of
No,
stuff.
absolutely not. We're talking about we have the full plan in front
Got
of
it.
us. Only
Got it.
thing that's missing from this plan that the members have is the executive summary, and we're talking about a few minor changes to it in rewording in the goals and whether or not we want to take out the 10%. These are the comments we made on goals are things that Steve and Larry thought we ought to reconsider and take a look at. That's all we've done.
Thank you, Cliff. I don't want to speak for Vinny because, you know, Vinny is very articulate about these things, but what he was trying to say, I believe last night, is we are in a very unique situation given that we've met safe harbor. And now we can really be very imaginative about what we can do to meet the needs of people who live and work in Watertown. And what does that mean? And that is a very different way of approaching things. And, you know, can be a municipal employee, it can be somebody who works for a business in Watertown. We don't have a Metco program, but to me, that leads to much more imaginative kind of opportunities. And he felt, you know, and again, please watch that video, but he felt that these two groups are talking at cross purposes and keep talking about a 10% thing as though we still have to meet SHI standards, and also the whole issue of a public hearing. It's more like, you know, get more imaginative about stuff. And like I said, I don't want to use his words because I don't want to misspeak, but I very much agree with where he's going on this. And I really wish you would all look at that before you put anything in public and really hear his comments and then think about this plan. I think it's really important. This plan seems dated to me in terms of where Watertown is, and we are a unique community. We are not Cambridge, we're not Somerville, we're not Newton. We have to think about what is the right thing for Watertown. And that's a lot of what's come out in the CPC conversations and the comments that I've gotten from the community. Thank you.
Well, if I don't want to kind of defend everything that we put in here, but I do suggest a good reading of the plan as it is now by anyone who's criticizing it, because there are a lot of things in there that are a little bit more than just creating a 10% or having a dated plan. I do hear your comment about the 10%. Looks like we're still directing our effort to the 40B.
Correct.
That number, that might be an argument against having the 10% number in there. Maybe we should make it 12% or something like that. I don't know. But there are other things in this plan besides just affordable housing. I mean, there are grants for improving the housing that people have if they need to fix up their house. There's a few other things like that in there, and those are in the goals as well.
I had a conversation with Jennifer Van Kampen about that years ago, Fred, and because and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time, but I did taxes at the senior center, and I saw the need that we had seniors that had apartments, but, you know, didn't have the capability or didn't have the wherewithal to either fix them or deal with the whole rental process, and made suggestions that went nowhere. There are a lot of things that can be done. I'm just saying, I did read through the plan. I got confused because I still have this other 3-pager that I was looking at that I thought you were addressing. So I apologize. I didn't realize that we had gone directly to the housing plan.
Yeah, but please do read through the plan, because there are other things in there. There's accessory dwellings, for example, that would increase the number of the housing units available and perhaps generate lower cost housing. I think that's the sort of thing you're talking about, and it's already in this plan.
I understand, Fred. I've been to those meetings as well with Newton, with Lexington. I just, people want something tangible at this point, and there are a lot of issues with accessory apartments in town from what I've heard and looked at so far. I think Lexington did this a few years ago. They added all of about 10 units at the time. Watertown is much tighter. There are a lot of different issues. You start locking people's personal property up into who they can rent to and at what price point. It's going to be very contentious. I'm just saying there are a lot of things floating around. I'm the kind of person that says start with something that is really excites people and speaks to Watertown. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay. You have the plan at this point. I think the plan has been circulated to the CPA and to a few other people in Watertown. If there are specific comments to come in, perhaps we should see those comments in writing.
I've gotten this, and Mark Kraskevich has gotten it. This plan has not been circulated in full to the CPA, just so you know.
Well, perhaps we should do that. Any other comments or anybody have ideas on how to resolve this?
I think at this point, we should probably just bring this back to us next time, and then maybe after that, we can bring it to the public. Then we'll have to discuss the schedule with Larry and Steve. We're getting into the holidays. You tend to get a drop off in public participation around that time of year. This year could be unique, has been every other way. Why not? But we can bring that up in the November meeting.
Okay.
They would address David's concerns as well.
Let's just go forward to the November meeting with the corrections that Larry's going to make into it that we talked about this evening. I'd really like to move on to the repositioning of the federal public housing. So we get this done tonight.
I think that's important.
Michael, you want to speak up?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I know we're limited on time, so I'll just summarize based on the fact sheet that we all got, the 2 pages that Emily, who's on the call and listening, I believe, who's our leased housing manager and oversees the Section 8 program. Margaret Moran from Cambridge Housing Authority is joining us. She's their director of planning and development, I believe, Margaret. And the Cambridge Housing Authority is through an intergovernmental agreement working with Watertown Housing Authority to help guide us. We're a medium-sized housing authority, so our capacity and staff is a little more limited, and there's certainly not many people with expertise in this area. It's not a new area of housing. The Section 18 program that we're hoping to submit an application for is something that's existed since 1937 Housing Act, I believe, the Federal Housing Act. And nowadays, HUD is pushing more public housing authorities to really consider what they call repositioning, whether through a RAD program, through a blended RAD program, through Section 22 voluntary conversion, or the Section 18 demo disposition. Now, the program is ultimately, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, is designed for more obsolescent housing authorities where the units have fallen apart, there's been a total lack of capital funding, and they need to completely redo this building and renovate. But there's a subsection that's the 50 and under, and we're just at 50 units. And I think it's sort of HUD's attempt to get the low-hanging fruit, housing authorities that are very small, which is 50 or under for federal public housing. They don't really consider our state portfolio, obviously. They're trying to, I think, incentivize by getting out of the public housing model, which arguably I know Brian Costello would say is the best model dollar for dollar. Public housing and how much you actually need in operating capital is a pretty good system, but nobody wants to do that direct bond and build public housing. They're doing Section 8 project-based vouchers. That's where the money is. And so given that Watertown's, as we all know, the payment standards for the HUD FMR in this region is just out of control. You're looking at $2,000 for 1 bedroom, close to $2,500 for a 2-bedroom. And so for us, it's sort of a slam dunk. We're looking to just convert 50 for 50 federal public housing units to convert them over to project-based vouchers. We would need resident consultation and the residents to sort of sign off. And we're in that process now. And we'll be moving forward in November and December to really do sort of a full court press. We've been talking to residents about this for over a year, but now it's really kind of doing one-on-one sessions, small group sessions to really explain to everybody nothing is changing for your rent, your utilities that we foresee. It's all going to stay the same. Your costs are going to stay the same, but you're going to get a better product. We're going to be able to, as Margaret says, we do things behind the scenes now with the funding. And so we're going to be able to increase our funding and perhaps even down the road do something like a second elevator, which that building sorely needs. If we remain under the current model, the capital and operating that we're getting is simply not going to be enough, especially the capital. At the current money that we're getting right now, about a little over $100,000, $105,000 a year in capital. To do an elevator, for instance, would take us probably 10 years. And by then, you need a new roof, you need a new boiler. Your windows need to be updated. There's a lot of other things that need to get done. And so with the Section 8 program, we can certainly fund, a new capital fund can be put together very quickly. With the projected revenue we're looking to have, I wouldn't be surprised if we'd be able to go and get a loan to do some sort of capital improvements as well. And so, I know Margaret's on the line and can help me field some of the more specific questions, but I did want to present this to the partnership in hopes that if the partnership sort of approves and recommends this, that I would then go to the town council to have this as an agenda item and want to talk to Steve Magoon about that as well. And so with that being said, I think the best summary to say this again is if we stay under the current public housing model, that building will eventually depreciate. And if we go under this model, now we're looking at a much more robust capital funding. And it's just the 50 units, and they would stay affordable, all 50. And that's the hope. I don't foresee HUD through this special application coming back to us and saying, you can only get 49 or 45 or 30. To be honest, if they did, it'd still be a slam dunk deal. But we just don't anticipate it. We really see ourselves converting all 50 units. So.
Okay. So my take on this is that it's a slam dunk that we would get considerably more money in doing this. The numbers were from a few $100s a month rent. With the Section 8, it would be closer to two grand. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the subsidy that we're getting is very small. If you don't even include the shelter rents, you're talking under $500 that we're getting per unit per month to operate it. I know Brian would always say, you just double that and we can work miracles. But they're looking to quadruple that essentially, if you're not including, again, the shelter rents. And so, I mean, the number you have before you is $841 per unit per month. You're looking to increase that to $2090. That's extremely significant. And that unit, and I'm sorry, that building will be in much better shape long term.
I have a couple of questions, if it's okay, Fred.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Firstly, just to be clear, the Joyce Munger building is the one in Waverly Street?
Sorry, yes, the 100 Warren Street. And 100 Warren Street is split into two parcels, state and federal. So this would just be the federal side of Warren Street, with 50 units on the right.
Okay, all right. My understanding is that, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, you or Margaret, that in order to be in federal public housing, it does not require that you be a citizen of the US. And it doesn't even require that you be here legally. So it's possible to have residents who are not in the country legally who are in that building. I don't know if you have in that category, but my understanding is also that Section 8 requires that you be in the country legally, either as a citizen or have a green card or some other situation. Am I correct in that understanding? And if so, would this affect any of your tenants?
Go ahead, Margaret.
So actually a little reverse, Cliff, the federal public housing program, either the public housing program or the Section 8 program, both have the same exact requirements where you actually have to be have a certain type of documentation or be a citizen to be eligible for the program. It's the state public housing that has provisions that don't require any kind of citizenship test for it. So there would be absolutely no change in eligibility between the federal public housing program and the Section 8 program. Different story if it had been state public housing.
It's been a while since I worked for a housing authority, you know. Margaret and I worked together in my first job out of graduate school.
Yeah,
Um,
many, I said to Michael many years ago.
Many years ago, many years. We do cross paths in Cambridge sometimes.
We do.
Next question is, who would own the units after the conversion? Would they be owned by the housing authority, or do you need to set up a nonprofit to take them over? And then
Great question. We're working with Klein Hornig LLP to do the nonprofit formation now. I mean, we're looking at what the best third-party structure would be. The best word to summarize it, I like the difference in the words. It's not an affiliate, and it's an instrumentality. And so we're really looking to have a mere board not lose any control, if you would. You know, once the transaction happens, it can't just be Watertown Housing Authority selling it to Watertown Housing Authority. But we're working closely with a law firm that has plenty of expertise in this and is doing this with several different housing authorities. And having Cambridge again in consulting capacity, we're going to make sure that the structure of this is so that all the revenue is going to better that building and those residents, and that we won't have somebody saying, oh, it's been a struggle to pay for certain costs in this building, so we're going to have to put a unit on the fair market. You know, not with the board and not with the structure that we're going to set up. We're going to make sure that those 50 units stay affordable as long as they possibly can until, you know, hypothetically 30, 40 years, there's a drop in the subsidy or something, they need to do something with the fair market rate. Okay, if they have to do it financially, it's a possibility, but we doubt it. You know, at the way that they're funding the Section 8 voucher program, and with the mirror board and the setup that we're looking to do with a nonprofit, we really think that we'll be able to maintain these 50 units for a very long time.
And
So
I'll just,
mirror board. I'm sorry. Say mirror board. It means that your WHA board will also be the board of the nonprofit.
That's the current plan right now, and at the November board meeting, Klein Hornig is actually going to be joining us to make that clear to our board. If we increase it to, you know, a 7-person board or something like that, it's a potential. But for now, definitely everybody that's on the Watertown Housing Authority board is looking to go over to the nonprofit board. HUD encourages this, and DHCD has no issue with it, nor should they, because it's not their jurisdiction, but regardless.
and I was just going to add that as part of the transfer out of the public housing program, HUD puts onto the property a use agreement that is attached to the parcel really forever, that it requires it to be operated as affordable housing. And the premise is that the Section 8 resources will be available to support that, but that affordability restriction does not wane even if the funding gets cut. And it's still a requirement of the transfer.
Okay. I think those are my questions at this time. Sounds like a good deal.
Okay,
Sounds like a great deal.
Michael, you're looking for us to endorse this at this meeting. Is that your goal?
If the partnership needs more time to review, certainly I'm willing to do that and to go over some more literature and prepare more if that would be comfortable for you guys. But yes, I think we're not on an extremely tight timeline, obviously, but we would say that we're aiming to try to strike while the iron's hot. As we all know, who knows what's going to happen after the election, all those type of things. So this is a great program, and we would love to get the application out, I would say earliest March, April, after we do an environmental review, council, our board votes, set up the nonprofit, get the tax exemption, and then apply. But yes, if we were able to get the recommendation for the partnership, and then whenever the council would be able to add this as an agenda item, that would be ideal.
Okay, if you would like to make a motion to do that. We're almost out of time.
I'll make a motion that we endorse the proposal put forward by Watertown Housing Authority to convert these units, and we recommend it to the City Council as well.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Second. Aye.
Aye.
David?
I said aye. I'm sorry, I may have a unstable Wi-Fi.
You're in favor?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
He said yes.
Yes, that's affirmative. Helen?
Yes.
Fred, yes. Cliff, you made the motion, so the
Yep.
motion carries.
Yep.
Larry, can you put that together for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Fred, if I could just ask Michael a quick question. I don't know if I'm breaking up, so if you can hear me, but what other approvals do you actually, what other approvals, where else do you need approval from besides the town?
We need to make a full court press and resident consultation. We need to show and evidence those efforts. We need the council approval, the local government, and then our own board. At that point, we send in the special application to HUD SAC's office, and then there's going to be, after that, a different application to get the vouchers. But once the program's usually approved, that shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, that's going to council and getting the approval is a requirement, and as it should be. You know, you need to involve your local government with these type of deals. You're getting out of the federal public housing game, but you're converting it to Section 8 vouchers. So, and I just had a question real quick. Sure, Dave, sorry.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
will the allocation of funds be similar, you know, with 100 Warren having both federal and state units, the capital funding in terms of the use of the funds for the building? Will that be the same?
To my knowledge, it's much more unrestricted in the sense that HUD is out. You know, it's you're the nonprofit that manages that is the owner of the property. And, you know, sure, the housing authority, I don't get any breaks on public procurement. If we do the procurement or monetization for that building, there's no breaks there. But the nonprofit itself and how those funds are used, and if they want to pay the housing authority to bring in a maintenance guy too, supportive service worker, which we're looking to hire, an LICSW, those type of expenses are not something that HUD would have to approve of. And so that's really where the advantages come in. That's where this is a great deal for us.
Could discuss this further and we'll learn more, I believe, at our next meeting. We put that on the agenda, but we are out of time right now as far as the TV station, I believe. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Good
Thanks,
night,
guys.
everybody.
Have a good night.
Night.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for all your help.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks, Larry.
Good night.